Good afternoon. Welcome to the Community and Economic Development Committee. Sounds so echoey, doesn't it? Let's take the roll.
Batra.
Present.
Ortiz.
Present.
Kamei. Torres.
Present.
Foley.
Here.
Thank you. Of a quorum.
Thank you. The first item is a review of the work plan. We are dropping the lease and asset management system status report. So do we have any public comments on this item?
No public comments on this item.
Okay, then I'll turn to my council colleagues. Anyone have a comment or a motion to accept the plan?
Motion to accept the plan.
Second.
Any discussion? If not, let's vote. Then let's, here we go, okay. Thank you, that vote is unanimous. We have no consent calendar. Moving on to the first report from to the committee is a downtown and regional wayfinding status report.
Fantastic, thank you.
Nathan and Jessica,
Thank you so much, Chair Foley. We are ready to go here. All right. Let's just wait for our PowerPoint to load. So my name is Nathan Donato Weinstein, Downtown Manager in the Office of Economic Development and Cultural Affairs, and I'm joined by Jessica Zank, Deputy Director in the Department of Transportation, alongside our team members, Martina Davis, Division Manager in Citywide Planning for Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement, and supported in these efforts by Chris Arkley, Downtown Coordinator in OEDCA, and Craig Dittman, Transportation Specialist in DOT. And we're really excited to be back after several years with the Downtown and Regional Wayfinding Update. Staff has brought this work plan to you annually for several years until the pandemic paused the work plan. And today, we're going to use this opportunity to go over some wayfinding basics, bringing you up to date on previous work on this subject. We'll also spend a few minutes exploring some new technologies and then presenting an overview of potential action items. So what is wayfinding? Well, put simply, wayfinding is really the process of navigating through a physical environment. So you can think of wayfinding as being assisted by things like a church steeple or a statue or a mosque. I think of the Parade of Floats statues that go along 5th Street leading to City Hall. But we often think of wayfinding signs, formal directional signs pointing you towards a restroom or a kiosk displaying a map. And wayfinding is really important for a number of reasons. First, and most obviously, it's about providing clear and intuitive guidance for efficient navigation. But good wayfinding also encourages visitors to explore and spend money. It can contribute to people feeling safe and even contribute to a location's sense of place and identity. In our downtown, wayfinding is vital. We have a lot of visitors here to our cultural facilities, hotels, convention center, university, and it's also where Silicon Valley Transit all connects. It also contains a number of districts which are often separated from each other by blocks that sometimes make it feel like there are gaps in the fabric. There are already several wayfinding systems in downtown that connect visitors with points of interest, but there are some clear deficiencies. So we have outdated wayfinding signs that need to be updated, auto-oriented signs that are not helpful to pedestrian navigation, and design language that is sometimes inconsistent. There are also missing links, as well as areas of sign clutter. Addressing these shortcomings is key toward creating a vibrant and welcoming downtown environment. And I'm next going to hand it over to Jess.
Great. Good afternoon, Jessica Zank, DOT, as Nathan mentioned. I am going to give you the background on the wayfinding work that occurred beginning roughly in 2015, when there was first a focus on the deficiencies that Nathan just described. In 2015, we did two kind of starting point things as a city with a lot of partnership from the Knight Foundation at the time. One of them was that the Knight Foundation had a team of experts come in and give us a recommendation about how to do really world-class wayfinding throughout our downtown. And secondly, we did a pilot project, which you actually see pictured up in the top right corner, with a nonprofit that was called Walk Your City, to really start to change people's perception of kind of how far things were and what was around them. We also started and finished in 2016 a real walking map for the downtown, the first one of its kind, and that was timed with the Super Bowl. We then entered into a master agreement with a group called City ID to develop out that comprehensive wayfinding system roughly along the lines of what was recommended by that 2015 report. I will take a moment. We did get some letters from the public over the weekend, and one thing that I will clarify is that in that 2018 timeframe, the master agreement allowed for up to $2 million to be spent for this work, but that amount was not budgeted. Only a fraction of that was budgeted, and even less was spent. So about $800,000 was budgeted from TOT and parking fund, and $535,000 of that was spent. So I just wanted that to be clear for everybody. Before that work could be done, however, the pandemic, of course, occurred in early 2020, and the staff for each department that were leading the work were reassigned to pandemic-related duties and other positions. So we did put a pause on the work. Late last year, Departments of Transportation, Office of Economic Development, alongside other partners like the Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement departments, did really pick up the work, assign new staff to it to try to determine how to move forward, which is what we're here to talk about today. One other important funding-related item, the city has applied for and been successful in a few different affordable housing, sustainable communities grant programs. One of them is for the IMC Village project that's now on Bassett Street, and that had $180,000 in the original application for wayfinding, which is one of the things that we'll talk about how we propose to spend that, which is we do think that doing something near term and hopefully impactful, like the tactical Walk Your City project, would be a valuable way to kind of get some different and quality wayfinding out into the downtown, especially because funds for that project associated with that do need to be expended this calendar year. The other thing that we have been coordinating with over this time is work at the regional level. As some of you may be aware, with seamless transportation really being at the forefront of people's minds around the region, wayfinding and consistent mapping are one of the key ways that the region really understands we have the ability to help make it easier to make trips around the Bay Area. So we have been one of the cities working with MTC over this time, and we expect to continue to do that as they move forward and begin to actually invest in this.
Thank you, Jess. And so a quick word about San Jose State University. With 40,000 students and 4,000 staff, they are a key downtown anchor. Recent expansions include their storefront on First Street and Spartan Village on the Paseo. And university leaders are really prioritizing downtown wayfinding, especially around the Paseo de San Antonio, to enhance safety, vibrancy, and finding your way. And it's also a way to integrate the university and its students more closely with the wider downtown. And so we just wanted to point out that in the proposed budget, there is some funding, about $25,000 that would be matched by the university to make some improvements in and around the Paseo, which may include some wayfinding signage, types of projects. And with that, I wanted to next quickly discuss a little bit about digital kiosks. So over the last few years, there's been significant interest in these products, partly as wayfinding tools. So some neighboring cities like Berkeley and sort of peer cities like Phoenix have partnered with private companies to install these. And there has been interest from downtown stakeholders on this subject. So to be clear, these tools are usually advertising driven. And in return for allowing advertising in the public right-of-way, cities may receive a share of advertising revenue. Now, from a wayfinding perspective, users can walk up to these kiosks and get location-specific information, customized directions. You can have maps that are quickly updated. And additional community benefits may be layered on, like public Wi-Fi or pedestrian counts. Staff has been engaged in researching the opportunities and challenges associated with these products to better inform policymakers and the public. And this slide presents just some of the pros and cons that we've been looking into, but there's much more discussion around this in the memo. And you know, while revenue generation is a key driver for cities installing these tools, there's wide variation in the dollars that cities may receive as outlined in our memorandum. And there's still much we don't know about what expectations might be realistic in downtown San Jose. There's also significant regulatory hurdles that include placement restrictions governed by the Outdoor Advertising Act, and this could make a San Jose deployment less attractive to vendors and impact a project's feasibility. Another major consideration is staff capacity and process, and this slide is really just to suggest that this is not a quick or simple thing to kind of flip on. So implementation of these products would require first amending the city's sign code, because this type of digital advertising is not allowed in the public right-of-way with our current municipal code. It's important to note that non-ad driven digital kiosks are allowed. So it's really about the advertising changes. This is a significant piece of work, and we just wanted to underline that. Staff already has council direction to complete a sign code change, but it has not moved forward due to capacity limitations and code changes that have been more highly prioritized. In addition, sorting out regulatory issues, conducting a competitive procurement, and planning for logistics in the public right-of-way requires significant additional work that would take many months, as well as staffing that is not currently available. And to be clear, there are no locations for digital kiosks anywhere in downtown that are currently being proposed. And of course, layered throughout this arrow is really community outreach and engagement. So to sum up on digital kiosks, ad-driven wayfinding could certainly be a part of future downtown improvements, but it is not the complete answer, and there is still a lot of unanswered questions. While staff is suggesting some incremental steps to further explore this tool and fill in some gaps, in the meantime, we have work to do on improving and curating our static sign portfolio in the downtown. And that leads us to our action items seen here, pending resource availability. So at the heart of things in the very near term is that grant-funded work that Jess explained to both declutter and augment our downtown sign portfolio, working with San Jose State University on improvements specifically around the Paseo. At the same time, we need to update our existing walking map so that it's ready for our large conferences and events. And when it comes to digital, we are proposing to conduct a request for information to better understand in a formal way realistic opportunities that digital kiosks might present. That step would also inform the contours of a sign code update, but it's important to be clear that staffing in PPCE is currently impacted by other prioritized ordinance work. Finally, staff will partner with MTC on upcoming transit-oriented wayfinding projects to piggyback and expand off of those efforts in ways that could benefit the wider downtown. And with that, we're really happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm glad to see a report on wayfinding. We have a lot coming down to the city of San Jose in a couple of years, so I want to talk a little bit about that when it's my turn, but first let's turn to members of the public.
No members of the public wish to speak for this item.
Okay, then I'll turn to Councilmember Torres.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you so much for the presentation. Do you mind if we go back to the outdated fines? Because I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I clearly remember as a kid when those signs went up. And for the city of San Jose not to update these signs for a downtown, to me is just surprising, to say the least. Now, more than ever, as the council member for downtown, can we go back to these, please? So I want to show not only my colleagues, but members of the public that these signs that they just mentioned, I mean, in the presentation, right here, have the ones, especially the one on the right, and then the other ones, those were placed like in the mid-90s in our city, right? And so I think this project is extremely important, right? If beautiful countries like Mexico can have wayfinding programs, we can too. And so that's why these programs are extremely important. And so, I'm a big believer that digital wayfinding or wayfinding in general is important for a downtown. So with that, I do have two questions, because these are the two questions that I always get asked on why I support digital wayfinding, and I always try to tell them, and some folks don't believe it. But can you just please answer, how were municipal revenue estimates of 10,000 to 20,000 per kiosk annually calculated, and what factors could affect these projections?
Councilmember, thank you. The city staff conducted a survey of other cities in recent years that have gone into contract with digital kiosk vendors, and so they took a look at their contracts, news coverage, and RFPs to kind of understand the types of revenue projections in play.
And what cities were those?
We looked at Berkeley, Houston, Santa Monica, Phoenix, San Diego, Miami Beach, and Oakland.
That's a lot.
And the results of that survey are on page 5 and 6 of your memo.
Great, thank you. And then the other one is, I know you mentioned it a little bit, but what specific regulatory issues and municipal code amendments need to be addressed to facilitate the installation of these digital kiosks?
Thank you, Councilmember Martina Davis, Division Manager, Planning and PBCE. So there's a couple things. So first off, the sign code in general prohibits off-premise advertising, so advertising a good or service that's not being provided on the site, unless explicitly allowed in some very narrow instances. Wayfinding kiosks is not one of those, so just on its face, that would need a code change. We'd also want to look at, we do have some, as we said, wayfinding kiosk provisions in the code right now. We'd want to look, are those adequate? Is the size right, et cetera, et cetera. One of the major regulatory considerations is the Outdoor Advertising Act that does govern off-premise advertising near highways. And believe it or not, highways can actually be considered surface streets. It just depends on how they're mapped by Caltrans. So within downtown, I have my little cheat sheet, we actually have several streets that are mapped as highways, and so off-premise advertising is actually prohibited in those rights-of-way. So you couldn't put these in the sidewalk of, for example, East Santa Clara Street or all of First
Highway
Street.
132, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, they don't actually even have to have a highway number per se. There's some definition around how they bring regional traffic. I once went very deep into federal and state law on this. So there is a map, you can find it on the Caltrans website, that kind of delineates what are considered highways. So it's Santa Clara, it's First, it's part of San Carlos, it goes around Plaza de Cesar Chavez. There was a jog where the Greyhound used to go into the Greyhound station. They have actually removed that. They did de-designate that.
Those are the streets.
But in short, it is some major streets downtown. The advertising couldn't be in and then couldn't be placed in a right-of-way where it's visible from those streets within a 660-foot buffer of those streets. So when you kind of draw all that out, it's actually a lot more limited where you can do off-premise advertising than it may initially seem when you are looking at those buffers. And so you could put the signs up in that 660-foot buffer, but you had to do it in a way where neither the sign or even the sign structure is visible from that street. So for example, you can't see the sign from West Santa Clara Street, even if it's not placed on West Santa Clara Street, would be a restriction. So I think that's made it, it's still doable, but just want to be very clear that it does very much limit kind of the most logical places that you might want to put these.
Well, they're all the important places that we should be putting digital wayfinding signs. You literally just mentioned all of downtown, the core of downtown San Jose. So before I ask this next question, this question is, so we have to work with our state ledge to change this, or?
Councilmember, there is a process that you can undertake to kind of what's called de-landscaping these roads, and that is something that we would, should we move forward with this process, we would need to look into and explore further.
Okay, and we can do that without a memo or a blue memo?
There is a process through that you undertake with the state, and it's something we would probably need to get back to you with a little bit more.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we would need to get back to you because some of these it's not the landscape freeway, so the process, I do believe we would need to work with the legislator to make changes.
Okay, that'd be great to know. And then the second one is, when we say we want to change the municipal code, on this level, in the dais, would that take 6 votes or 8 votes, since we're changing municipal code? And that's probably a question for Johnny, not for you guys.
It would just be a majority vote of the council.
Okay. So it looks like we have a lot of homework to do then. And I'm committed, because I want digital wayfinding in downtown San Jose by the time I leave office. So, and with that, I move to approve item D1.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is council all asleep on this side? I'm just checking. Just checking. I appreciate your comments, Councilmember Torres, and I really think that wayfinding is really critical in downtown San Jose. We want people to come down here and we want people to find their way. So if they're going to Center of Performing Arts, for example, we want them to be able to find restaurants or areas of interest instead of thinking that Happy Hollow is right next door to them when it's, a long ways away from them, which are real stories. I actually heard people say that as I was at the CPA not that long ago. So I'm really glad to see the wayfinding come through, but this is just a status report, and my question is, or my comment and question is that 2026 is a big year. We're gonna have a lot of people down here, or we hope to have a lot of people down here. So what's our timeline for implementing any wayfinding? And Nathan, you referred to resources twice. Does that mean dollars and staff, just staff? So when are we going to see forward movement on this other than just a status report?
Great. So I will speak to the recommendations that are on slide 12. We work together to lay out these recommended 6 actions with our resource level in mind. We do not have money and we do not have dedicated staff among any of the departments. And so I'm going to let Martina speak to item 5, the sign code update, because I think that's very timely. But for the other items, the tactical improvements, the work with San Jose State, the refresh of the downtown walking map, which we think is really important to have those available both digitally and physically for the 2026 events, as well as the RFI. We do believe we can take on those items with the staffing that we have without dedicated staffing, but we don't think we could go beyond that. So, just we're not moving forward with all of the things we originally wanted to because of the lack of staffing and funding. I don't know, Martina, would you speak to the sign code?
Thank you.
Yeah, so currently, the sign code would be done by our ordinance team. Currently, we do have 3 planners on that team. That said, the budget proposal would be to cut one of those positions, and that would definitely impact just in general that team's ability to do work. So we would have to look at the priorities on that team. We have a number of priorities, including SB 9, some housing element items. We're also getting direction to look at things related to the Super Bowl. So it could be a challenge to start that work with staffing changes that are upcoming on the team.
Might this be a good opportunity to partner with the Sports Authority and Team San Jose on wayfinding, since they're both geared towards driving activity to the city of San Jose, and they might have manpower or I don't know that they have resources or financial resources, but they might have manpower or women power that we might be able to pull from?
A great point.
Human power, thank you.
It has been many years since we've met with Team San Jose on this item, and I don't recall meeting with the Sports Authority on this item. We have, however, just to keep the juices flowing, definitely worked with the Downtown Association on this over the years, as well as Walk San Jose and kind of our other downtown partners, in addition to the Knight Foundation and other.
That's great. There's a lot of downtown partners who might be helpful in this. Chamber of Commerce, to think of another one. So I really am excited to see signs that are not from 1990 and that aren't faded and that are easy for us to read and more pedestrian friendly than car centric, so closer to where a pedestrian would be walking or riding. Okay, with that, let's vote.
Oh, wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You vote this side up.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I also agree wayfinding is important, and I just wanted to add to what our chair has said in terms of looking at partners. That might be a way to work together, and also if they have any suggestions, because they're also in the same business, to get people to where they need to be, that might be very, very helpful. I also think that we know that there are going to be these 2 huge events. And I understand that we're in a bit of a budget crunch, but I also understand that if you're not ready, you're going to get stuck. So I think that as we, with information that is known, that the Super Bowl and FIFA is coming, we ought to sort of like figure out what is the time necessary where we would need to do some of the upgrades and things like that. That would be helpful, because right now we're sort of going from this end towards 26. But if we work our way backwards to say, this is the period of time that we need to have it done, so that we are prepared, because there's going to be a lot of other things that we have to worry about with such big events. And in order to make it successful, I know wayfinding is very helpful. I will say that, I understand some of the members of the public are very cautious about, anything digital, and whether or not there are effects of, the digital kiosk or whatever. So I think that maybe clearly giving people the understanding of what it is and what it isn't, I think needs to happen during the interim, because I do know that I've been approached by some who are very, very concerned, and it's sort of equating it to a digital billboard as opposed to just something that can be smaller, more direct, something that's not as intrusive. And I will say, I totally understand about Santa Clara Street. Santa Clara Street is 20 miles an hour. I have not seen anyone, I do my best to go slowly, but the cars are going really fast. I don't even know they know that it's 20 miles an hour. So I think, there are concerns, legitimate concerns. So as you start thinking about all these things, certainly timing is important, and, trying to figure out how to do it before we really need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, let's vote. Thank you. We are moving Wayfinder forward. We're moving our way forward. Next item is the disability, thank you for that presentation. Next item is the Disability Services and Community Engagement Work Plan, Annual Report. Sarah and Rania. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members, members of the public. My name is Sarah Sarate. I'm the Director of the City Manager's Office of Administration, Policy, and Intergovernmental Relations. I'm joined by my colleague, Rania Mohsen, our Disability Affairs Officer, who will be providing you a summary today of the work we've done over the last year. But before she does that, I just want to make a note of what a privilege and humbling experience it has been to be charged with overseeing the development of this critically important portfolio for our city. And I also just want to publicly state that I am deeply grateful for Rania, for her patience, her passion, and her proclivity to learn, combined with her commitment to embed our work in the community's lived experience. And it is because of that passion that she has that we have so many wonderful things to share with you today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rania.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, this is a new space for the city, and I consider myself an ally in this work and appreciate the opportunity to continue learning in this capacity. For this presentation, I will intentionally try to demonstrate accessibility and disability inclusion. In preparation, we made sure the PowerPoint has appropriate color contrast, alt text and reading order, and I will make a point to address relevant contents on the slide. The Disability Affairs portfolio of work emerged from lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic. We heard from the community in 2022. Councilmember Foley submitted a budget document that led to the city manager's organizational assessment and budget appropriation in support of the portfolio in the last 2 fiscal years. As you may know, and as mentioned, I joined the Office of Administration, Policy, and Intergovernmental Relations as Disability Affairs Officer in December 2022 to continue the city manager's work centered around improving inclusion of people with disabilities in city programs, services, and facilities. In June of 2023, Council adopted the Disability Inclusion Equity Pledge, formalizing the city's commitment to disability inclusion and recognizing it as a human right and matter of equity. This pledge is rooted in the social model of disability, which originated in the 1970s and 80s and is now the internationally recognized way to view and address disability. The social model of disability suggests that if the environment were set up and constructed in a way that was accessible for people with disabilities, those individuals would not be restricted from full participation in the world around them. What if our environment is what disables people and not their functional limitation? What if our environment was designed so that it is accessible to everyone, regardless of a person's disability or how they may interact with their environment? For example, constructing sidewalks and entrances that are wheelchair accessible can turn a disability into an ability. If cities were built and planned with physical disabilities in mind, and there was no social stigma attached to looking or sounding different, then having a physical impairment would no longer be disabling. The Disability Affairs portfolio of work prioritizes a barrier-free environment and equitable inclusion of people with disabilities across the organization in design, implementation, and funding. We adopted a phased approach to advance the portfolio and normalize disability equity and identified 3 objectives to guide our work. 1, build institutional awareness about disability inclusion. 2, support disability affairs organizationally, both internally and externally. And 3, improve accessibility in various areas across departments. Through our work in Phase 1, multiple work streams have developed to address our physical environment, behaviors, systems, and policy. 5 strategic actions emerged, shown here in 5 colorful circles, and include: cultivate proactive accessibility. Accessibility requires us to shift our mindset and be proactive in removing barriers at the design and development stage of our work. Advance policy and advocacy. This plays a critical role in systems change and improving life outcomes of people with disabilities. Build awareness through education, training and skill building about disability fundamentals, language, rights, and anti-ableism will foster understanding about disability equity. Partner with community. In the spirit of nothing about us without us, partnering with people with lived experiences and including them at the table ensures inclusion, representation, and meaningful input. Strengthen data collection. Collecting data about our community will only help inform better policies. This framework supports the city's phased approach and ongoing work. Current Phase 1 activities have focused on operationalizing the pledge and collaborating with departments on immediate accessibility improvements, or the low-hanging fruit, as we like to call it. Some of the outcomes include the following early actions: updated the alfresco parklet sidewalk seating regulations and permit application to now include an accessibility plan and accessibility compliance as part of the checklist for approval. Identified nearly $1 million of funding for accessible pedestrian signal updates citywide and internship opportunities for people with disabilities. Restructured the Disability Access Improvement Grant Program for small businesses that now provides funding up to $25,000 to make ADA construction improvements. To launch the new phase of the grant program, we partnered and co-hosted a listening forum on August 30th with California Commission on Disability Access. We facilitated discussion between small business and disability community representatives to provide a space for learning and foster a shared understanding about barriers. Both Chair Foley and Vice Mayor Kamei were in attendance at this event, and we appreciate your continued support on this effort. For accessibility, we also co-hosted a similar forum via Zoom as a webinar on December 11th. Also in Phase 1, activities included monitoring the ADA grievance procedure and implementation, which includes working closely with the city's ADA coordinator, partnering with community by participating in over 75 meetings and events with key community members and organizations, and co-leading with the county's Office of Disability Affairs a disability access working group of other government agencies to share best practices and lessons learned. A large portion of our phase work included a gap analysis across 4 departments, pilot training, and skill building. We partnered with World Institute on Disability to help us advance some of this work that began in March of 2023. On this slide, there is a graph that shows 3 activities: gap analysis, training and capacity building, and outcomes of improvements in disability inclusion to occur over a timeline between March 2023 to June 2024. The analysis is helping us identify gaps, customize tools, resources, and training to build awareness. A community meeting was hosted on April 18th to share progress on the portfolio and glossary of disability access terms, which is included as an attachment to this report. We had nearly 50 people in attendance, and many expressed support for the city's efforts. Some of the input provided included additions to the glossary of terms and various concerns. To name a few: public safety and 911 alternate response, emergency preparedness and response, and digital accessibility and technology. Based on this feedback, we plan to address the topics going forward. Staff are also active in working groups centered around improving disability equity, including public safety and emergency response.
The city manager's proposed budget for fiscal year 24-25 does include the continuation of the Disability Affairs Officer role as a permanent ongoing position. And the integration of the portfolio would go into the mission-aligned Office of Racial and Social Equity, formerly known as the Office of Racial Equity, which aims to normalize, operationalize, and embed equity practices across departments. As you may know, disability often intersects with other structural forms of identity, such as socioeconomic status, gender, immigration status, race, religion, to name a few. This intersection can exacerbate stigmas and discrimination experienced by people with disabilities. For example, if someone is Black or brown and has a disability, the combination of these factors together shape a person's life experiences, often impacting their employment, housing, and access to healthcare or education at more than twice the rate of people without those disabilities. Integration of the portfolio aligns with that office's current strategy and will facilitate an intersectional approach that considers the complexities of people's situations rather than just one aspect of their lives. It also will allow a continued partnership with my office, API, on policy and intergovernmental issues.
Moving forward, some of the key anticipated initiatives include: develop training curriculum currently being piloted to facilitate citywide disability education and awareness, disseminate newly created tools and resources, streamline gap analysis across departments, and review and update our internal policies and develop standardized procedures where needed. Much of the work completed and anticipated is not possible without the partnership of community members with lived experience, organizations, city departments, and our leadership. We recognize that this is just the beginning, and we appreciate the continued support from our partners and look forward to continuing our collaboration to create a San Jose where everyone feels like they belong, thrive, and have equitable opportunities and access to our programs, services, and facilities. The recommended action today is to accept the Disability Affairs Annual Report, and that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Yes, Michelle Mashburn, please make your way to the podium.
Love that I have to juggle things. So I want to say I support the work that's been done. I also want to state, though, that there's a lot more work to be done. The structural variable that we're dealing with is embedded deep, and that gap of awareness is also kind of lacking. So I took 2 screenshots of people that I follow on social media. One of them is Gregory Mainsfield, who I believe is an attorney in the Midwest area. He's like, the core of ableism is not only that disabled people are inferior, the core of ableism is that disabled people are expendable and not worthy. The core of ableism is that disabled people's lives are not worth living. The other one is about what do we lose when we lose the people with disabilities in our community. And this is by Pacing Pixie, who's actually in the UK. And it's not just us that miss out as disabled people, but it's everybody misses out because you don't have the disabled creativity, the disabled brilliance, the disabled empathy, the disabled passion, and the disabled insight. So with that, I'm just going to leave with two questions. If we maintain a compliance mindset, which I don't feel that this work plan proposes, however, I think that that's often what we revert back to because of the structural variables. Will we ever be able to reach racial and social equity? Because I'm not here as me, because I am not the most impacted and the most at risk in society. There are other disabled people that carry more risk than I do. Additionally, as elected officials serving in our city, what specific actions can each of you take that will ensure that equity is truly comprehensive and inclusive? Thank you.
There are no further commenters on this item.
Thank you for those words. They're really powerful and challenging to us as city leaders. We truly must not just say that addressing issues to make disability access equitable, we need to do the work to make it happen. There are people amongst us who don't look disabled, but they are. We have to make sure that we treat everybody equally and with respect, and know that everybody, regardless of their physical or emotional, social well-being, have something to contribute to this society, and we need to lift them all up. So it took a while to get funding for Ranya's position. I tried 1 year and got half a position, and then I got the full position the following year, and eventually we found someone to fill the position, and Ranya, you are doing a fabulous job. It's so heartwarming that you are there because you've jumped into a position that you didn't know anything about, but you've researched it and become someone very knowledgeable, very easy to explain to me and others what we should be doing and how we should be going forward. I truly value the work that you do, and it feels like we've seen you the last a few meetings in a row, and I hope we continue to see you on this topic because it's hugely important that we address the issues that are of concern, and that is making this city accessible in all aspects for all members of the disabled community. So with that, I will stop with my speech and turn to Councilmember Torres.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the presentation. I think this work, I shouldn't say I think, this work is extremely important. You know, we need to be a city that welcomes everyone, including folks with disabilities, and so, you know, this is important work, and we can't leave our community behind. And with that, I'm going to ask this question, and then I have two follow-ups. So I don't know which one's actually to ask first, but I want to hear this one first, though. What metrics or indicators are being used to measure progress on the Disability Inclusion Equity Pledge that was created in June of 2023, so last year?
Go ahead, I'll let you start.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. I will say that, you know, this is we're currently in the first phase of our work, and as we mentioned, we're kind of considering a phased approach to this portfolio. As far as metrics, we, you know, one of our priorities is to strengthen data collection and to be able to measure our progress. And so moving forward, that is something that we are prioritizing. We are starting to, you know, during the gap analysis, we have issued a survey across our 4 pilot departments and are working on interpreting that data as well. In addition, I've recently, or during this first phase as well, we have updated the ADA grievance procedure, and so and now we are able to monitor and track that moving forward, and that was done earlier last year. And so those are some of the metrics that we are working on compiling so that we can assess our progress moving forward.
If I could just add a few things. So this work to date has been with a limit-dated resource out of API, and I think the majority of the last fiscal year has really been about learning. When I think of establishing metrics, I think one of the guiding principles is ensuring that you're measuring the right things that are going to help inform some sort of action or change going forward. So, as a matter of fact, as part of this fiscal, the proposed budget, we were thinking of adding some performance measures around this portfolio of work starting next fiscal year. But because her position, the disability affairs position, is just now being proposed as a permanent ongoing position, and because it's going to be embedded in my colleague Sulma's Office of Racial and Social Equity, I actually paused on making any recommendation. I want it to be fully integrated into the new office and make sure that when we do add a performance measure, it is based on what we've learned over this past year, and that it's actually going to measure something that we think is going to contribute to meaningful change. So I think from a performance measure perspective, you'll probably see a few measures in the budget for the proposed 25-26 fiscal year.
Great. And I know you've been mentioning the ADA grievance procedures. So somebody who has a disability can file a grievance with a city program, a private entity at this hotline? Do they email, do they call, do they Facebook? I don't know. How can you take me through the steps, please?
Yeah. So the ADA coordinator of the city actually oversees that program. I do work closely with the ADA coordinator in monitoring and tracking that program. So there is a web page with a form that anyone could use to submit a grievance or complaint. There is also a general email, ada@sanjoseca.gov, that people can submit.
Okay, perfect. And then this is where the other questions I have are going to come into play. So I had a constituent whose daughter is hearing impaired, and she was a little bit upset because she went to the Disney on Ice and our SAP Center, and the program didn't have a sign language interpreter. So, one, I had no idea how to respond to that, so I was, taken aback, because it's a public facility, so we should have somebody. And then the other one just sprung into my mind is when I went for the first time ever to actually see opera at Opera San Jose. I'm into opera now, by the way, everyone. But I just realized that I didn't see a sign language interpreter there, and that's, again, our building, right? So the SAP Center, California Theater, those are our buildings. So is it the role of us to have a sign language interpreter, or the folks leasing the building, or anybody who's using the building for a performance?
Wave to give me a tough question. Council member, I'm actually going to defer here to the city attorney's office because there's obviously a legal question there. I don't know if this is something that we would take offline.
Yeah, we could always take it offline, but that's a good example of what we're talking about, right? We want, especially kids who are not hearing impaired, who have a hearing impairment, to come and enjoy downtown on Ice, right? Because it is our facility, right? But I get it that we lease it out to folks.
Yeah, the issues that Rania and the ADA coordinator typically see are related to our programs or our facilities here in City Hall. So I would really want, if you want to add anything there as well.
So I will say, if we were to receive such complaints about, facilities that we have third-party, vendors oversee, we do actually forward those complaints or requests to them. And so it is something, that we would respond to and attempt to,
Great.
To provide that accommodation.
Thank you. And this is another question. I don't want it to make it seem that it's a I got you question, but it's definitely a question that just sprung up at the Empowerment Day here at City Hall. And especially since we're seeing a lot more home-based businesses. Well, a business owner approached me today saying that they got a letter from the city that they have to do their business, accessible to folks with, because of the ADA law. And then she told me, I said, well, my business is out of my home, but I don't own my home, and I rarely know the business. I don't know the homeowner. I just pay him rent, but he knows that that I have my business in his house. But then, how am I supposed to make the house ADA approved if he owns it? But I don't want my business to close because my business is inside his home. So again, another, whoa, I'm just a council member question, but I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, that is another tough one that will probably require a little bit more deeper dive to understand, what are the terms, of that lease. But usually, if businesses are serving members of the public, it is their responsibility to ensure that it is accessible. But that is definitely something we probably need to address offline.
Yeah. We could definitely do that. And then thank you so much for your presentation. The work has to continue, obviously, and thank you for all the progress that you've already done. Much more progress needs to be made. So with that, I move to approve item D2.
Second.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Kamei.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank the team. You've done such great work, but I would agree there's a lot of work still to be done. So you're going to be here for a long time. But I want to thank the leadership of our Chair Foley, because she's the one that really started it. I just happened to come along a year and a half ago, and we do have our Disability Awareness Day coming up in October again, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. But there is a lot of work to be done, and so I do know that there are limited resources, but what I would say is that we have to constantly be pushing. One of the things that it's kind of a little bit of a pet peeve, because it not only affects, if you're in a wheelchair, but it also affects, pedestrians and what have you, is when there aren't sidewalks. Right? You have to go out into the street and, risk yourself, trying to be safe when there aren't any sidewalks. So because Sarah is here, one of the things that I really would like to see in the future is if there could be any potential funding or anything that we could go after to try to fix some of those sidewalks, because it's a very dangerous, when we do our safe routes to school, one of the biggest things that comes out of the concerns is when there are no sidewalks, pedestrians, bicycles, everybody is sort of at risk, right? And it also is an issue if you're in a wheelchair. So I think that if there are ways in which we can, sort of like tee it up with some of our legislative buddies, that would be really helpful to try to find some resources there. I also think that what Councilmember Torres brings up in terms of accessibility for, opening things up for venues and things like that. We did have the ability to have certain areas for accessibility, but I think that when you're thinking about having things available like sign language, I think that one of the things that we may want to think about is to be able, when arrangements are made with some of the promoters, whether or not they have an offering where they would have sign language, where they would have ways in which you could have integration of, and have it be more inclusive. That's one of the things we learned when I was on the County Board of Education is how do you make the environment much more inclusive of others, right? And I think that that might be something to think about as you're thinking of your future plans. But again, I just want to thank you so much. It's something that I look forward to, and I look forward to working with you again.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. If I may, just to respond, Rania works very closely with our IGR team looking at not just grant opportunities, but also legislation. We've tried getting a few earmarks for accessible signage in the past. We're always thinking about these opportunities, and she's very much embedded in their work. Also, in regard to holding accessible meetings, this for us means physical and digital, which helps us make a plug for a training that's happening later this month. Would you mind mentioning that?
Yeah, so we're actually hosting a training on May 30th around digital accessibility. And that's because any event usually starts, an accessible event starts with accessible communication. And so this training that's scheduled for May 30th will basically provide some tips and education around what that means and how it is that we make sure that our digital content is accessible. And so that includes everything from web pages to invitations, documents, social media apps. And that's really like step one in ensuring that our events are accessible. And that is open to all employees. It's an internal training.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Seeing no other hands, let's vote. Thank you, that motion carries unanimously. Moving on to thank you for that presentation. Moving on to the next presentation, which is the Citywide Community Engagement Framework Annual Report.
Chair Foley, Rosalind Huey, Deputy City Manager. I'm going to kick off this item very briefly with a few opening remarks before turning it over to both Aurelia and Sabrina. So we're really glad to bring you this report on community engagement efforts in the city. We know that community engagement has been a top priority for this council and obviously for all city departments throughout the organization. I think the one thing that we want to ensure that we remove as many barriers as we possibly can for our residents to participate in a variety of different engagement activities. And certainly we learned a lot during the pandemic, and so we're using some of those lessons learned as we continue this work. I do want to acknowledge the work of the city's Community Engagement Working Group. This is a group of probably over 30, 40 different city employees across different departments who are volunteering their time to focus on engagement, to research best practices, to provide training to city staff. This is in addition to their regular job, so we are very appreciative of their work over the last couple of years. And today our report is really going to focus on three main items. First, our work on a citywide community engagement framework. You'll hear about that later. And then also to give you an update on the use of our on-call consultants, both community engagement consultants, and we also have a list of community-based organizations that the city departments as well as council district offices can use in their engagement activities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aurelia.
Thank you, Rosalind. Good afternoon, council members and members of the public. As Rosalind mentioned, my name is Aurelia Bailey, and I'm with the City Manager's Office. Today, I'll be giving you an update on the on-call community engagement consultants and the community-based organizations, our CBOs. As many of you know, the city leads a variety of public projects and planning processes that involve engaging our community so that they can learn and provide feedback on projects that may impact them. Staff often contract with consultants to expand staff capacity. Consultants bring a range of services related to the community engagement, that they have specialized skills and project experiences to improve the quality of the process. In August of 2022, City Council approved 9 consultants for master agreements on community engagement work for all city staff, including City Council offices, to use. We do this by utilizing service order process rather than a full procurement process. Also, at the same time, City Council directed staff to issue a separate request for proposal, RFP, to establish a list of on-call CBOs to partner on outreach and engagement efforts. So as a result, the City Council authorized the execution of master agreements with 22 CBOs. Implementation of the on-call CBO programs, I would have to say that it has been a little delayed due to the needed training and capacity building with CBOs, with our CBO partners, which took place in November. And then also there's some staff transition with Office of Economic Development and Cultural Affairs. Here on this slide, I do want to highlight some of our city projects that have utilized our on-call list. The first one is our citywide community engagement framework, which my colleague Sabrina will actually be going over in a few. Community Stabilization and Opportunity Pathways Fund Commission with OEDCA, Winter Consulting assisted staff in preparing and implementing a communication strategy about the commission and developing their goals and targeted outcomes. As a result, the Community Stabilization and Community Pathway Fund Commission actually includes 5 seats for people with lived experience with barriers to opportunity and economic mobility. The planning, Pleasant Hills Vision with the planning building and code enforcement contracted with PlaceWorks for the Pleasant Hills Golf Course guiding principles process to assist with the guiding principle document. PlaceWorks is actually working with 2 of our CBOs who are currently on our on-call lists, the Latino Coalition Silicon Valley and the Vietnamese American Roundtable, to help residents who do not participate in our city processes. Police Department Community Engagement Plan is a comprehensive evaluation of community engagement activities. This evaluation will gather feedback from stakeholders and diverse community members to provide recommendations on how to enhance the police department's engagement efforts. The Department of Transportation, with their curb digitization and management pilot program. They also have a contract with PlaceWork and is developing an engagement plan which includes interviewing key stakeholders and creating a community advisory committee. Lastly, before I hand it off to Sabrina, I would like to express appreciation to Zach from OEDCA, who led most of this work. I know the on-call list has been very helpful, especially on projects I know I have worked on that needed consultants' expertise, including the one on the citywide community engagement framework that I'm going to hand it over to Sabrina.
Thanks, Aurelia. So, okay, there we go. So the Community Engagement Working Group actually grew out of the Government Alliance and Race and Equity work. So it didn't start until June of 2020. But we have been meeting this whole time. And to arrive at the reports and the framework that you have in front of you today, we started with our own knowledge of internal staff knowledge of processes and procedures. But pretty quickly in December of 2022, we had a meeting with more than 50 staff to get their feedback on the principles, recommended processes, and stakeholder information. And then we had a round of engagement focused on neighborhood association leaders, Project Hope leaders, and people from hotspot areas in the spring of 2023. We also launched a public survey in the summer of that year that was out for 9 months. And finally, you have the report from Winter, who helped us with a final round of engagement paid for by a small community foundation grant for an additional 3 meetings in February of this year. Thanks. So the report really focuses on a set of principles. We had a much longer list initially, but this is our final sort of summarized high-level list of guiding principles for staff when it comes to considering engagement. I'm not going to read them all, but they're people-centered, equitable, accessible, transparent and accountable, and collaborative. Thanks. And when thinking about applying this in a standardized process, the steps are all up there, so I'm not going to regurgitate them all. You guys can read them. But most of our recommendations focused on really thinking about timing and clarity of communication. We really encourage staff to start thinking about engagement at the beginning of a project, not just when engagement becomes relevant to the project, but to ensure that the design is informed by the goals, as well as providing staff the opportunity to potentially do engagement early enough on a process to have significant impact on the final outcome. We also have some focus on clarity of information to the public regarding why feedback is being sought, exactly what kind of feedback the public will have an access to, and what the resulting changes could or could not be to projects based on that feedback. Next slide. And our next steps are really focused on, as Aurelia said, finalizing the contracts with the rest of the community-based organizations to bring them on board as potential partners for city staff to work with. Working on, really for the community engagement working group, we're looking at implementing this report and this framework to make it more standard process for staff who will be doing community engagement moving forward. So really looking at maybe a train the trainer model or something similar to ensure that those 30 to 40 participants are all trained up and available to train other city staff on best practices. And with that, we will take your questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
We do not.
Then I will call on Councilmember Torres.
I feel like talking today, so I apologize, everyone. Yeah. Sabrina and Aurelia, thank you so much for this presentation. I do have a couple questions, though. I noticed that some of these contracts are provided through grants. However, a lot of these contracts are paid through our general fund, I'm assuming, right? Or maybe that's a Rosalind question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Council Member. So for departments or city council offices to use the list, the on-con list, each department or entity has to have their own funding. Although we have contracted with these organizations to do the community engagement work, each department has to have their budget for that process. So it could be general funds, depending upon the type of project in a city department. It could be some other funding source. It could be a grant. So it'd be a variety of different funding sources.
Okay, but thank you for that answer. But for example, let's say the Pleasant Hills Vision, and I'm going to tie in the other question that I had. Pleasant Hills Vision process, right? PlaceWorks has a $250,000 contract with us, and in this presentation, I heard that they're utilizing the Latina Coalition and the Vietnamese Community Roundtable. They're paying. Who's paying for that contract? Are we paying for that contract, or the developers are?
So good question. So in that instance, the department, PBCE, has contracted with PlaceWorks as the prime consultant to do community engagement, and then PlaceWorks has provided two subcontractors to do the additional work. So those two additional organizations you mentioned, they have hired those two community-based organizations to do further community engagement work.
Okay, so we
subcontract.
Yeah. So we hire.
They're being paid though.
Yeah, no, which is good.
Yeah.
So maybe then my next question is, and I think we're heading down that path and we're alluding to that path. So at the end of the day, I think it would be great for community-based organizations like the Vietnamese Community Roundtable, Latina Coalition, or even Latinos United for a New America to apply for community outreaching grants instead of going through a consultant. You know, because at the end of the day, especially if it's general fund money, right? It's coming from our pocket, right? So, are we making it easier for community-based organizations to actually apply for consulting gigs instead of consultant? Because I also sit on a board, VTA, which provides over $700 million a year in consulting fees. And so, again, this is taxpayers' money, and it's always better. I've always believed that it's better to hire folks who actually know the community and know the neighborhood instead of some consultant based out of, I'm assuming, probably San Francisco, because I kind of know. I see the list. They're not based out of here. So, I mean, those are my 2 cents. Are we making it easier for CBOs like Latinos United for New America, Vietnamese Community Roundtable, Latina Coalition to actually get these contracts?
Yes, that was exactly the intent of having the second list of on-call organizations. So we will have the 22 community-based organizations that city departments can contract directly with. So they don't have to go through a different consultant. We will have the ability to contract with them directly to do any type of community engagement activities. That was definitely the intent.
Great, and I'm assuming these CBOs already know.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your presentation again, and then I move to approve item D3.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Vice Mayor Kamei.
I had a similar question that Councilmember Torres had. The thing is that I remember last year when the 22 nonprofit organizations came forward, there's a maximum of $250,000 per organization. And so if you have a consultant getting subs and they're utilizing these subs for up to $250,000, then that means, they get their cut or whatever it is, their administrative costs, and it's kind of indirect, sort of like getting to those community groups or community organizations. And so I think I am concerned that, the money isn't going directly to the CBOs. It is going through this larger, and actually they're from Berkeley, I think, organizations that have the up to $500,000 per, right? And so I kind of would like to put a watch on that, because I think that if those organizations are not able to directly go to our either, city departments or anything like that, is there a reason why? I mean, I think that it's probably easier for the departments to use one and maybe have the opportunity to use 2 sub-consultants. I get that, but the whole idea I thought of really reaching out to those who know our community is that they get the dollars directly, right? So I'm kind of like just watching it to see how it goes. And then the other thing is that because we have a maximum of $250,000, are they, I don't know, are they sort of spoken for? So does that mean that we're not able to contract with the Latina Coalition for anything because they're already going to use up their 250 in this instance? Or, I just kind of like don't understand how that's going to work. So if someone could explain that to me, I would appreciate it.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So we do have staff in the Office of Economic Development and Cultural Affairs who's actually tracking the amount that each organization is spending toward their contract. So when a department reaches out, that staff person can provide that information. Because we're just in year one, there's plenty of capacity, so we're not like up against that threshold of the maximum amount, but we'll have staff tracking it. And if we see that, for example, one department is picking one CBO like several times, we will certainly advise departments, well, perhaps choose another CBO for this particular work. So we'll be able to monitor. And also, the intent of this community engagement annual report was to actually do just that, come back to the committee so that you can have an understanding of how many CBOs are being used, how often, for what projects, and what has been the impact. So we're happy to do that as well.
Great, thank you so much. And I do want to say thank you for the early engagement. I think that when you engage the community at the front end, it really, really helps a lot at the back end. I just was wondering if you have, sort of a large consultant, and they know what, they've probably gone through these processes before, just sort of taking over the local people who, perhaps over time, we want them to grow too, right? So I just wanted to make sure that, that we keep that in mind. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Seeing no other hands, let's vote. Thank you. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the final report, Coyote Corridor Study Status Report. This is just an update on the study of the Coyote Corridor, and I believe we have Martina with the presentation. Looks like Chris is joining us as well.
My favorite team is here. Always have a question for this team, no matter what.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
No matter what.
Okay, thank you, Chair and Council members. My name is Martina Davis. I'm a Division Manager with Citywide Planning. I am joined here today by Chris Burton, our Director. Unfortunately, our Project Manager, Brent Carvalho, is out sick today, so please bear with us as we do this without him. So I'm going to give you a background. We'll talk about the project deliverables, where we're at now, what we've heard from the outreach, the feedback we've gotten so far, and we'll talk the timeline and next steps. So I'm going to start with talking about where we're talking about. We are looking at the properties on the east side of Monterey Road from Metcalf down to the city boundary, which is right about at Sobrato High School, between Monterey and 101. We are including a couple properties up in the Coyote Hamlet on the west side where they have actual frontage on Monterey, so the bait and tackle shop, for example. Totally, this area is 188 properties with about 2,400 acres. But you'll see here with this map of what's actually within the city limits, it's actually a lot fewer properties were annexed into the city. So really we're talking about 63 of the 188 properties would actually get new standards because they are incorporated into the city. And that's about 30% of the land area of the properties on the east side of Monterey Road, and only a small fraction of the land area of the entire Coyote Valley. I do want to point that out. So we really are only talking about 63 properties. So I'm going to stop here on this slide to talk about the history of the study, because I do think this is probably a good example of how we got to here, and it's really important to understand why the study is what it is in our scope. San Jose had long planned to develop Coyote Valley back in the 50s and 60s. Our city manager, Dutch Hammond, was out making promises to property owners who had orchards and farms, and many of them annexed to the city with promises of development. And so those properties you see here in the study area were annexed in the 1960s as part of that movement to turn San Jose into the LA of the North. There was a backlash. That sort of type of growth slowed down before it got down to Coyote Valley. So as we know, it never happened. All the single-family homes and schools and strip malls did not happen. That said, the city had still planned for growth of Coyote Valley. In the Envision 2040 general plan, we had broken Coyote Valley down into 3 areas. In the north was campus industrial. The middle part of Coyote Valley, which is includes some of the properties in the study area, was an urban reserve that was to be developed in the future, but not through the time frame of the general plan, so not through 2040. And then the south part was a green belt. That was adopted in 2011, but again, the sentiment around Coyote Valley started to shift around preserving Coyote Valley. So I'll give you a couple examples. In 2018, San Jose voters passed Measure T, which was a climate smart bond measure that included $50 million for land acquisition for flood and water protection in Coyote Valley. The city adopted Climate Smart and the VMT policies that really caused that has us focusing our development in urban areas and not on the outlying areas of the city where they have higher resource, therefore higher greenhouse gas needs. And I think it sums up very well AB 948, which was adopted by the California legislators, signed by the governor in 2019, and I'll quote from that bill, which created the Coyote Valley Conservation Program. Recognized Coyote Valley as, quote, a unique landscape providing agricultural, wildlife, recreation, climate, and other natural infrastructure benefits. The bill goes on to state Coyote Valley as a resource of statewide significance, has been subject to intense development pressure, and has needs of restoration, conservation, and enhancement. So that was sort of the larger conversations going on around Coyote Valley at the time we were doing the second 4-year review of our general plan. As part of that process in 2021, council did vote to remove the campus industrial as well as that urban reserve designation and revert pretty much the entire valley to open space or agricultural designations, and that led us to our project here today. So the property owners on the east side of Monterey Road had some pretty serious concerns about that. They pointed out their properties are very different from the rest of the valley. They're smaller on average. A lot of them are actually already developed. They have that frontage along Monterey. The ones that were still and are still in agricultural use have expressed to us some pretty serious financial constraints with that. And they have given us some studies around that we are including in our study. And so, they said, look, when you designate this agriculture, you're leaving us with nothing. We are not going to be able to really do anything with our property. And we all agreed, and so council directed us to undertake this study. And I will quote from the council direction on the study. Go to our next slide. All right, so which is to identify expanded recreational and commercial uses for properties on the east side of Monterey within the Coyote Valley in San Jose. The study will lead to new zoning standards with new allowable uses, new development and design regulations. It will consider environmental sensitivity of the surrounding area. And in all cases, new uses are to be compatible with broader environmental objectives to equitably preserve Coyote Valley for San Jose's diverse community. We officially kicked this off in May 2023 when we selected Placeworks as our consultant. So the project we started with outreach. We went out to the community, we had a community meeting, we also had some focus groups with some stakeholders where we just started with what do you want us to study, what are your constraints or your concerns, what are you looking forward to with this. That helped inform a baseline assessment where we essentially do a baseline assessment. We looked at kind of data, existing constraints, regulatory constraints, opportunities, et cetera. We completed that draft report earlier this year. We moved on to starting to actually look at some of those expanded uses and start to put our minds around the economics around them. And that we completed a draft report in March, and we have shared that with the community and the stakeholders, and we are in the process of whittling down the list of uses to move on to our next steps, which are, we're gonna move on to actually putting the pen to the paper and coming up with some development design regulations. We should be done with that later this year. Now, that said, there is an elephant in the room named CEQA. I'm sure you've met that elephant before, and we will need to do an environmental impact report. So we are planning to start that this summer with an expected completion in 2025, and that should inform some of that development and design regulations. So I think those will be tweaked probably through the environmental process. There may be some things that might make sense, and then we find out, well, to mitigate environmental impacts, you have to do, unpalatable things. We may think about those again. So that's how those will be interrelated. There will be additional opportunities for public outreach, both just on the design and development standards as well as on the CEQA. And with that, let me see. Oh, yep, outreach and feedback. So I will generally summarize the outreach we've gotten. As I said, we've done focus groups. We've also had general community meetings. You'll hear from a lot of the interested people today, so I'll keep it short as they'll be happy to speak for themselves. But generally speaking, we're hearing concerns from property owners that the uses we're looking at just aren't going far enough, that any ties to agriculture, open space, nature is really just not going to work for them, and they're not seeing viable uses here as far as they're concerned. That seems to be a general sentiment we're getting from property owners, is that concern. The other side, we have a lot of very interested environmental advocacy groups who are kind of hearing the other side of, wow, this seems to be pretty intense. I'm concerned about the environmental impacts of what you're studying. Some of this is going too far. We have people who feel the whole area should be torn down and taken back to wildlife, and that would be their desired outcome of this study. So we kind of have very, very varied opinions on this with our stakeholder groups. So now the meat of it, and this is, I promise, I think my second to last slide, is what are these uses we're looking at? So on the left, you'll see the uses that was actually given in that council direction for us to study. And then on the right are expanded uses that we've included based on both either staff research, or a lot of them were added based on the community feedback. So again, where we're at right now is looking at these and saying, okay, do we want to move these all forward to the design and development phase? I think we are going to try to look at as much as we can to see, can this stuff be done in a way that is environmentally sensitive and meets the studies of the goal, or excuse me, the goals of the study. Off the top of my head, I'll tell you one that I think we are going to take off, because while it was suggested by the public, when we've gone back to public outreach, it's been pretty unpopular, has been cannabis cultivation. But the rest of the uses that we've had on this list have been, just kind of depends on who you ask on whether they think it's suitable or desirable. Some people like some of them, some people are concerned, so we're going to keep studying these. And this is essentially just a repeat of our next steps. So again, moving on to design development regulations, environmental review, and then back to council when we're complete with that. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you for that presentation. I assume we have members of the public who wish to speak on this topic.
Yes, we have 3 people that wish to speak, so I'll ask you to make your way to the podium in order, please. First, we have Lena, and then Ken, followed by Norm.
And just a reminder, you have 2 minutes. There's a timer at the podium, and there's a timer up here as well.
Good afternoon, Chair Foley and members of the committee. My name is Lena Ian, and I'm with the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, speaking today in regards to item number 4. On behalf of the authority, we commend City of San Jose staff for their work on this important project and their efforts to lead a thoughtful and collaborative process. We appreciate today's opportunity to reiterate our support for a few key priorities, including those expressed in our letter to Council dated March 7th, 2022. First, through our agency's mission to protect natural and working lands for future generations, we strongly support the conservation of farms, ranches, and other working lands in Coyote Valley to sustain the economic and environmental viability of local agriculture and to fulfill the city's own greenhouse gas reduction goals. The natural and working lands element of Climate Smart San Jose, approved by Council just last year, counts on these farmlands of local and state importance to sequester carbon as one of the most important steps that the city can take to address climate change. Second, for this project, establishing intensity of use and design standards will be an important next step towards meaningfully evaluating other potential uses that are compatible with the surrounding ag and open space uses, as called for by the council in the original 2021 directive. The memo also calls to equitably preserve Coyote Valley for San Jose's diverse community. So lastly, this project must continue to coordinate with other ongoing planning efforts, including the authority-led Coyote Valley Conservation Areas Master Plan, the Peninsula Open Space Trust Wildlife Infrastructure Feasibility Study, and implementation of Climate Smart San Jose and the countywide agricultural plan. We applaud the city's leadership so far to invest in the natural infrastructure of this region that sustains and protects our communities, and we look forward to continued collaboration on public serving planning and investments to serve the needs of both current and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Sir, if you want a mic, they can give you a mic, so you don't have to go all, yeah, but I know you already made it down.
Come on forward. You can. I did, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, everyone.
Good afternoon, my name is Ken Sasso. I have been a resident of the East Side Monterey Road corridor all my life, 80 plus years. I've been involved in many studies for the area, land use and whatnot, dating back to the 1975s, 80s, 90s, 2002, and yet I wasn't involved when all this took place with the Brandenburg and the Sobrato buyout with the $60 million bond issue. We are not in the Coyote Valley. We are actually in the city of San Jose. We were annexed, we're zoned, we had residential, commercial, industrial zonings dating back into the 1970s. We've been waiting for our services that were connected with the annexations, and we're still paying for them. And we're still waiting to get a fair shake out of this whole process. We haven't seen that happening in this study. There's no economic values to the uses that they're proposing, and there's no extended service that'll happen for our property in the foreseeable future. I represent 6 generations that are tied to that piece of property. That means that's 25 people just in my family, just in my immediate family. I've been the farm worker. I've helped with my grandparents, my parents, myself, my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren. And we need to restudy this because we're now told that the barriers to.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Sasso. Thank you.
So we have Norm next, and we received an additional card from Alice. So Alice, you will be our last speaker.
We did what we did. He was cool, but he was a lot more sad.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Norm Mattioni. I'm the attorney who represents several of the property owners along the corridor. I sent you a letter which basically speaks to the frustration of the landowners through the process. I think to epitomize the frustration, the label Coyote Valley, which Mr. Sasso alluded to, is part of the issue. The study was initiated on the requests of the property owners in participating in the 2021 general plan update that this is a strip of land that is quite distinct from the greater Coyote Valley to the west. It has the Monterey Road, It has a barrier down the strip of the Monterey Road. It has the railroad line, and it's pushed up against the Coyote Creek Park chain that most of these properties have had land taken for that. So that distinction is a very important one, together with the viability or non-viability of the land for agriculture. It's interrupted by many uses: golf courses, RV parks, even housing, old corporation yards, if you will, storage yards, construction yards, and the like, with a division of smaller parcels of 5, 10 acres, 7 acres, 11 acres, not viable for agriculture. Yet when you go through the uses that are outlined, those uses of agricultural support, farm equipment.
Thank you. Next speaker,
Thank you,
please.
sir.
So we have Alice, and then we received an additional card from Jerry.
Good afternoon, Chair Foley and council members. My name is Alice Kaufman. I'm Policy and Advocacy Director for Green Foothills. So the goal of this study, as staff explained, is to analyze potential new recreational or commercial uses that would be compatible with and supportive of environmental goals and agriculture in Coyote Valley. And the analysis that staff has done has been very thorough, and it has shown that there are very few new uses that meet these criteria. When the council voted in 2021 to change the zoning throughout Coyote Valley, it was because Coyote Valley is critically important for a number of issues, primarily for wildlife movement, flood protection, and groundwater recharge. All of these would be at risk from almost all of the land uses that have been analyzed by staff. With regard to wildlife movement, Coyote Creek, which runs along the back of all of these properties, is critically important for wildlife movement. It is the backbone of the entire Coyote Valley wildlife corridor. The risks to the wildlife movement would be from light pollution, noise, human activity, trash, and other impacts from development or intensification of use. And there would also be risks to the use of the Coyote Creek Trail, users from vehicle traffic across the creek and trail. With regards to flood and groundwater, this whole corridor is within the Coyote Creek floodplain, and development here would increase flood risk to San Jose residential neighborhoods by pushing floodwater downstream, which in this watershed is north into downtown San Jose. And then with regard to groundwater, this area is uniquely vulnerable to groundwater contamination because the groundwater table is so high and it communicates directly with the drinking water aquifer. So in short, the only type of land use that would be appropriate here is extremely low impact, farmers markets, agricultural education, those.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. We have Jerry, and then that'll be our final speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Jerry DeYoung. I'm a planning consultant representing some of the property owners. I want to say that I'm going to talk as fast as I can, and I hope you can get it. Basically, I wanted to point out, in the event that you haven't had an opportunity to read the letter that Normani wrote, was a simple request for there to be a request by you or a direction by you to the staff to take this back before the entire council. As indicated in Norm's letter, we're at an inflection point. That inflection point to the property owners is that the assessment has been done. We offered multiple comments on the assessment, the initial assessment. The staff and consultant have not responded to that statement yet. At kind of the contention point is that there continues to be this idea that Coyote Valley is agriculture. If you look out there, Coyote Valley is not agriculture. If you look at South Valley, the South Coyote Valley, 82% of the land is less than 10 acres. If you go to Mid-Coyote, about 77% of the land is less than 10 acres. It's not classic agriculture. So we're at an inflection point. I'm hoping today that at the owner's request, you would direct the staff to take this back to the council. With the exception of Councilmember Foley, none of you participated in the decision about how to move forward. And in that lack of understanding of what was done, you're relying on the staff to interpret what the council directed them to do. The staff has indicated to us in general in the community meetings that the current general plan has to be looked at, and in fact, if they continue with that, that will be the impediment to new uses. We will find at the end of 3 years that the general plan, the current general plan, which talks about agriculture and open space, not relative to County Valley, will impede the ability to have uses on the sites that might provide appropriate economic value to.
Thank you. Back to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and thank you for the public comment. I'll turn first to Councilmember Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our staff for the presentation and to our public commenters. I just want to say I appreciate the work that staff's done on this study. I do have some caution when it comes to a project like this about what the potential changes could mean for the community. I'm not in opposition to it, but I do want to make sure that as we make this decision, we do so carefully. So one issue I'd like to raise on page 43 of the baseline assessment, there's a summary of known tribal cultural resources in the study area, including a historic village and burial sites, and spiritual significant shell mound sites. Are there protections that staff are considering for these resources from being disrupted by development?
Yeah, I mean, in short, yes, and really the CEQA process is going to get into deep detail on that because cultural resources are considered CEQA resources, so we'll be doing a lot of analysis on that issue. But yes, I mean, it's in the baseline study because it is identified as a concern.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask, how do these new potential land uses interact with the natural and working lands element of the Climate Smart Plan?
Yeah, so, I think that is going to be our next phase of analysis when we really start looking at how the uses could or could not actually work on properties, is really looking at that. So I don't have a great answer for you for that right now.
All right, no, thank you so much for that. And then finally, how do you expect the findings from the environmental impact report to inform or impact the final recommendations of the study?
Yeah, so in a few ways. First off, where you find a significant impact, CEQA does require you to look at alternatives. So if we do find significant impacts under CEQA, we'll obviously be looking at project alternatives. I think, a lot of it will come down to some of what that technical work is going to uncover as we start looking at potential impacts to wildlife, creek, et cetera, right? So, for example, you may find any lighting could be considered a significant impact on the environment, and then that would start having us look at lighting standards or hours of operation, that kind of thing, right? Riparian setbacks is another one. Setbacks to the creek area, that's something that definitely would get looked at as part of the CEQA that could inform setback standards, development standards within those areas. So all that kind of stuff we expect the CEQA should help inform the study.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to the wider discussion when the study's complete. I just know that this has been a sensitive topic for our residents throughout the city of San Jose, as well as for our local indigenous tribes. So I proceed with caution. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Batra.
Thank you very much for that report. I think it's a fairly sensitive topic for with the responsibility to balance our future uses and land uses. At the same time, recognizing the private property owner's rights to deriving an economic value or whatever their values are. So a question I have for you is on this memo, page 2, it says the study was directed by the City Council at its November 16, 2021 meeting. The result of the study will inform future proposed amendments to the general plan as to allowed uses and development regulations. Then it says modernizing the agricultural and open space zoning regulations will provide better distinction between the ways agriculture and open space functions in urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. Now, are the uses which you are looking at for which you're going to do the CEQA study are only agricultural related and the open spaces, or other commercial uses which these properties could be potentially applicable?
If we could bring the presentation back up, if that's possible. We have the list of uses that are currently
Could you get a little closer to the mic, please?
Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, if we can bring the presentation back up, we have the list of uses. So if you'll, when you see the list, you'll see some of them are very directly agricultural related, some of them less so. Let's see. Okay. Let's get to slide 9. Right, so you can see, some of them, again, agricultural supplier, right? That would be directly agriculture related. Some of them less so, lodging, small eco hotels. For example, the golf course has expressed interest in having lodging on their property there within the study area, so that would be something we're looking at. So it's a variety of uses. The key direction was it was to be compatible with the agricultural nature of the area, so that's sort of where we're at now, is trying to figure out what and how could these uses be done compatibly, if at all.
So I think we don't do these studies lightly or that often. So I think since we have this opportunity to do this work, and would it not be appropriate that you look at all the possible uses and let the CEQA studies dictate where or how we should develop this thing, rather than assuming one kind of development and then doing the CEQA, whether that's supported or not?
Well, so again, essentially that is what we're doing. We're doing it within the bounds we were given on this project, around the context of preserving Coyote Valley, understanding that these properties are different, but are still within that larger geographic area. So again, what we were tasked with doing was evaluating uses, and let me pull up the exact wording from the direction real quick. So again, use is compatible with broader environmental objectives, as well as adopts new zoning ordinance for uses that complement an agricultural orientation. So this was the bounds of uses, and again, we did get a number of these actually from public input of what we thought could be complementary to the agricultural orientation. So that was the bounds we were working in, and then the environmental review will further inform how some of these uses could work.
Councilmember Chris Burton, Director of Planning, Building Code Enforcement. If I can just join and add on to what Martine is saying. So the context for this conversation really comes from our second 4-year review. So as you'll recall, every 4 years we look at the general plan and ask those big questions of what do we need to fundamentally change. And so back in the second 4-year review, which was initiated in 2019, but many of the actions didn't, because of COVID and multitude of other things, didn't make it back to council till 2021. one of those big questions was about the future of Coyote Valley. So outside of this specific area, there were a number of large parcels that were considered for other uses. There were some other sort of pieces moving in that time. And so one of those fundamental big questions for the general plan 4-year review was what should happen in Coyote Valley. The direction that came out of that and the direction that we received from council was we wanted to preserve the natural and open environment throughout the Coyote Valley. Understanding that this particular pocket along Monterey Road has a mix of existing uses that are already there, council wanted to ask the question, well, what about these parcels where there are these sort of variants of, there's some RV parks, there's, a number of different types that are mixed in amongst some of these other agricultural uses. And said, we'll take this corridor and go take a look at what else you can do. So if we're going to say for the breadth of Coyote Valley, we're going to preserve it as open space, what are other opportunities that we can provide to these property owners that will allow them to consider their future development of their property or the future use of their property? And so that was really the initiation of the study, and that's the sort of guardrails that the City Council gave us at that time, was to say we want to preserve the overall nature of Coyote Valley more broadly. We do want to provide some consideration for property owners within this corridor, but we want to limit that and keep it consistent with that broader view for the rest of Coyote. So that's really the sort of background and context and why we're talking about really a limited amount of uses and not the sort of full breadth. There obviously has been a lot of work for as long as I've been with the city on Coyote, and a consideration for big industrial uses, for residential uses, for a whole mix of things. But so right now, based on where the conversations in that 4-year review have landed, this is kind of the direction we've been given and the future vision for this area.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Now, the gentleman who said that his basic statement was that this was a misclassification, that this is all agricultural, because of his explanation was somewhere that those are 10-acre lands and all that pieces, and they're really not the traditional agriculture. Is there any consistency with what we consider agricultural or not agricultural?
Certainly not going to claim to be an expert on this one, but obviously the changing nature of agriculture in the valley has evolved significantly over the last half of the last century into this century. And we've seen changes. Obviously, I think there's a lot of pressure on agricultural uses within the sort of broader Silicon Valley, including Coyote Valley. The sort of availability of workforce, the availability of skilled labor to support those uses. There's a whole number of changing dynamics that we've seen. So we're not sort of necessarily speaking to that specific, we're touching on it through this study, but we're not sort of really focused on that. It's what are the other uses adjacent to it, that in the instance that agriculture is not viable on these sites, what else could you do that maintains that overall character?
Okay. There's 125 units are involved from the county. Are they involved in this project at all? Or, because the way the land is shown there on the east of the 101 is all just showing the Coyote Valley, and then south of that or west, east. On the west side is 125 units from the Santa Clara County.
Parcels.
Are they part of the study or they're not part of the study? It's only the part on the east of that 101 is part of the study, right?
Yeah. Okay. It's just the city part. Yeah. It's part of the study.
The county's
not part of it.
All right. So I would consider that if at all possible, we should really look at the expanded uses and let the CEQA studies and others will reveal whether any of those expanded uses would be applicable or suitable for that area, and let that study dictate that if anything. So I don't know, Chair, if I can make the motion to say accept the report by expanding usage. Is that possible here or not?
I don't, can you clarify what expanding usage means?
So we're limiting it to the agricultural related uses, and the gentleman who came and spoke on behalf of the owners, his point was to look at other uses besides the agricultural uses.
gentleman can come and clarify.
Okay, you can certainly make that motion.
Yeah.
You can make any motion you'd like. We need a second to continue
find out.
on. Is there a second to that motion? Seeing no second, then I'm sorry, we won't
fine.
consider
That's
the motion at all for now, or the item for that matter, because it's not on the table.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions, council member?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Kamei.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. I have a few questions regarding the CEQA, which is the next step forward. I'm just wondering, as I look at the potential land use expanded list, would CEQA only look at what's on your list here? Would it preclude looking at anything else? So that's number one.
Yeah, so we do need to give us, have a scope for CEQA. So CEQA would specifically evaluate the uses that we are
Listed here.
Yeah, and these are the ones that we are currently evaluating as part of the study.
Okay. So I understand that you've had focus groups, you had general community meetings. This is what happens when history catches up with us. This is something that Dutch Hammond started many, many years ago, and here we are today. I think that Coyote Valley is a very unique area. There are many beautiful things. We love to see the open space. We love that it could be agriculture. But the fact of the matter is that agriculture, having been in the nursery business, and I consider myself a sort of semi-farmer, it is really, really hard. And so my assessment is you cannot shut out these property owners who had been promised many, many years ago, right? So I think that what I'd like to see is a deeper sort of engagement. Earlier we talked about community engagement, a deeper engagement with those who are going to be directly affected. The request to us was to send this to the City Council, since the City Council obviously has been new. I think that even prior to that, before the CEQA start, is really having the staff or the consultant or the outreach people have a conversation with the property owners. Because when you think about, yes, we would like for it to be agricultural, but in terms of making a living as a farmer is really, really challenging, right? So I think that alternatives need to be further explored before you start the CEQA process. And so I would encourage that, and I guess I need to ask, is that a possibility?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I think obviously through the prior process, through the 4-year review, there was pretty extensive coordination, outreach, and discussion around this specific issue. And our intent through this study has been to continue along those lines. And again, that's part of why we've been working relatively closely with the property owners in the area to understand their concerns. And I think also why there was consideration of those adjacent uses and not just saying, we're happy with agriculture, right? Understanding and hearing that there are challenges around that. So that being said, that's why the study has been scoped around these specific uses. I think if there was interest in broadening that out, that's something that we'd probably want to bring back to the full council for a conversation before we sort of proceeded down that path.
Okay, with that, I would accept the report and I'd cross-reference it to the City Council for that discussion.
Second.
Councilmember Kamei, can you be more specific about what that discussion is?
I think that the current City Council has not had a discussion about that area. I know that there's a great interest in preserving Coyote Valley. And what I'm hearing from staff is that this is what they've come up with as the potential land uses, and that they're going to study only this. So I guess I would ask for it to come to City Council and think a little bit harder as to, are there other areas that need to be looked at besides just what they've come forward with?
I retract my second.
Councilmember Ortiz, I don't believe you can do that. Under parliamentary procedure, once a motion is made and seconded, it becomes owned by the body to vote on yes or no. Is that, am I correct? Thank you. I'm sorry. So the motion will be to vote it up or down as you choose. I have some, any more comments, Vice Mayor?
Well, I guess what I would say is that my understanding as we move forward with CEQA is that it would only look at this. What's the, you know, in terms of the potential land uses as is on the list here, except for the cannabis cultivation, which is what they specified. And so what I wanted them to explore was, are there any other uses, right, that have not been, you know, sort of like sifted through? And so I wanted it to go to the full City Council to be, which is what was requested in the letter for that discussion. And Director Burton said that, you know, having it go to the full City Council would be an option. So I'm just referencing it to the City Council.
Okay. The cross-referencing just cross-references this report. It doesn't expand.
Yes.
It doesn't
yes.
expand the
but
study in any way.
Correct. The discussion then could be taken up with everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I do have some questions about the CEQA process. Usually, we have a piece of property and there's a development proposed on it, and the CEQA process is specific to that use. So help me understand the CEQA study you're going to do on all of these uses and all of these properties. What will that look like, and won't that come to council for approval?
So first off, yes, the CEQA would come to council for approval along with the proposed zoning and potentially general plan changes. Yeah, it's a challenge, right, to do this on, you know, this scale. I will say it is a discrete number of properties, so we can look at, you know, common issues, creek setbacks, et cetera. So I think essentially what we would be doing is really looking at kind of common issues that would come out of these uses, and then any specific issues from any of the uses that would be unique to that use. So noise, traffic, lighting, et cetera. And then, you know, take a look at the properties and say, okay, what are the constraints we have? We know most of them front the creek, and look at it that way in a more general sense. So no, we wouldn't have you know, this battery storage would be here on this property, but you can look and say, if someone were to do battery storage, what were the issues that could come up? What would you need to do to mitigate those issues in general on properties that look like this and this type of location? So that's how we would analyze that. Is that helpful?
But that seems overly broad to me, that you may be doing a CEQA based on, okay, we're going to store batteries here, or we're going to have a hotel restaurant with an outdoor pavilion of some sort. The traffic studies alone are so different. The pollution, the usage is just so different. I'm struggling with that component of this presentation and the generality of a CEQA that is usually more specific to one parcel and one use.
Yeah, so the type of CEQA clearance we would be doing here wouldn't be to that level, so it wouldn't give clearance to any individual projects. You can think of it more like the downtown EIR, right? That says, you know, we know we're gonna have this type of development downtown. We know downtown has a historic district that has these constraints. If you wanna build this type of development in this type of area, these are the things you need to look for, but then it's the individual projects would need to do subsequent analysis that would look at, well, this hotel would create this amount of traffic, so it would have this instance. We can look kind of more generally to say, hey, generally speaking, you know, once you have more than XYZ hotel rooms, you're creating this amount of trips, which is likely to be a problem. Like, you can kind of look at it in those general senses, but yeah, no, it would not be able to result in project-specific clearance for any individual project, because yeah, we would not have that level of detail for it here.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, say Mr. Sasso, and thank you for touring me around the property a couple of years ago, I really appreciate that. Say he wants to build, I don't know, wine tasting where he is. Will he have to obtain another EIR? Or he can rely on the one you've generated?
So ideally, he would not have to do an EIR. We would, you know, if we found any significant environmental impacts, you know, it would be up to council to sort of on the higher level to say, you know what, we don't want projects that could even come toward creating these impacts, so we're not moving forward with these standards. So ideally, we would set our program up, well, that would be council's direction, or council could say, you know what, we're okay with hotels here. We know that they'll be too big to likely cause impacts and clear some of those impacts up front. So again, transportation is one that a lot of times you clear knowing this many hotel units is coming in this area, for example. So we could do that, but yeah, any subsequent project would need to do its own environmental clearance. If it falls sort of within the parameters often of what was evaluated, a lot of times that subsequent clearance is just kind of checking the boxes, like, yep, we've already determined, you know, as long as you turn the lights off at 10, I'm just kind of making stuff up, but you know, you turn the lights off at 10, we know that's not gonna be an impact, great, my project is gonna do that. So, you know, that can kind of take care of those issues, but there would still need to be some site-specific analysis at minimum to check for that. Sometimes it may say, the EIR may say, hey, this type of thing could cause impacts. When a project comes in, they will need to do their own analysis of X, Y, and Z, and they would need to do that. So it just depends.
Okay, thanks. So the motion on the floor right now is to send this to council. What could you gain as staff by this going to council that you can't get from us right now?
So I think, you know, obviously this is a progress report on the work that's been done so far based on prior council direction, which was at the time fairly specific. So we're happy to provide that report to the full city council, which is what we would bring through a cross-reference. I think the question would then be if council wanted to redirect staff's effort, then we would probably do an analysis of what that would mean on sort of, you know, the resources we've currently expended, if we would need additional resources to undertake further work, to consider, you know, a different scope of project. But I don't know that that's something that we would do, you know, out of just committee recommendation. That's something I think the full council would need to weigh in on.
Thank you. Initially, I was leaning, and I've read the letters and the correspondence from everyone, and I was here when we made the vote in 2021, and I remember the commitment to the property owners that we would investigate. In a serious manner, investigate the things that they could do with their properties. I'm sensing that they're still dissatisfied with the investigation that we are doing, and I'm feeling that the city council, because they have changed, there's only 4 of us still on council who were there at that time, that this perhaps isn't a bad direction for it to go to city council for the rest of council to weigh in. This is a status report, so we're not, at this point, we're not changing direction. Alls we're saying is, let's have the full city council weigh in because it makes sense. Is there, Johnny, Rosalind, is there a reason that we should delay sending this to city council? What are your thoughts?
So, excuse me, my thoughts on the issue. If the committee desires for the scope of this project to change, then that would have to go to city council so staff could get that direction, change the scope. You know, I'm not sure about budget, certainly the time frame. So that discussion needs to happen at the full city council, if that's the committee's desire. And
Okay.
I would add, if that is the committee's desire, we would like to get a time frame for that to go to council should the committee just make that decision. Because obviously this impacts the schedule that staff has already determined and impact budget as well, likely.
I understand, so that adds more thought to my opinion on this matter one way or the other. I'll move on to Councilmember Torres right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you for some of the questions already asked by my colleagues. So I have two questions. One of them is, I'm echoing the concern that Councilmember Ortiz brought up. I'm assuming that folks in our indigenous population did actually come to some of the community
Yes,
meetings?
we've invited them to the focus groups and community meeting, and we had a representative at the first community meeting.
Okay, and that was the last time that they...
Yeah, that was the last time, but we do invite
But they
them.
expressed their concern?
Yes.
Okay.
Most definitely.
Perfect. Hopefully we continue to make sure that we reach out to them. And then the second one is obviously the motion on the floor, right? And maybe this is because I'm also, you know, trying to debate on how I should vote on this motion. So my question to you is, and I don't mean to put staff on blast, but would you prefer that that the CEQA process has started before coming back to City Council, or would you prefer to come to City Council without that process beginning?
No, it would be important for us to get clarity on scope before we go into a CEQA process, because we would likely have, if the scope changed, we would have to restart that process.
So, okay, so you prefer to just keep moving along?
No, I'd prefer to get clear direction from City Council.
Oh, direction from the City Council before starting the CEQA process.
Yeah. And I'll just jump in. I mean, so staff has gotten direction from council about the scope of the project. And so that's what we've been moving forward. It's not necessarily a staff preference. We're doing the work that we were directed to do. Again, if this committee wants to change the scope of that work, that has to go back to City Council for their discussion and action and further direction to staff.
Great, thank you.
Seeing no other hands, we're ready to vote.
Chair, can you explain what we are voting here?
We've just voted on cross-referencing this to council.
For discussion of the scope, if the council wants it. We didn't change anything.
No, alls we're discussing, we're cross-referencing just the memo that was submitted to us today, not changing the scope. It may, if it went to council, it may result in a change of scope.
Right.
But that is not what we're voting on. We voted on sending this to council, sending what was presented today directly to council.
Okay, all right.
The motion failed, though.
The motion failed.
Yeah.
Councilmember Torres, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I just want a motion to accept the status report, and that's it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on that?
think there seems to be a confusion about the scope. Oh, sorry, I should have taken permission before.
Go ahead, that's fine.
That whether the scope should change or not is what we wanted to discuss, and the right place for that discussion is the council. That's why the motion was to take this cross-references to the council so that it could come back with a reassertion that the current scope is the right scope, or it may come back that the scope should be different. And I think that opportunity is what I think Vice Mayor requested, and I think that would be the right thing to do with so much of council having changed, the times have changed, and it would be fair to give that opportunity to the council to really make a decision, either confirm it or deny it. That would be my comment on it.
So we have a motion on the floor to accept the item as presented. Just a reminder that this will eventually go to council when the CEQA study is done, and at that point, the current council can weigh in at that time. Seeing no other hands, let's vote.
That motion passes with 3 yes votes and 2 no votes.
Okay, so concludes our regular agenda. We'll move on to public comment. This is the opportunity for members of the public to comment about anything that was not on the agenda.
No members of the public wish to speak for open forum.
Then we stand adjourned. Thank you.